According to the American Library Association's Office for Intellectual Freedom, between January 1st and August 31st of this year, there were some 695 attempts to censor library materials and services, and documented challenges to 1,915 unique titles, a 20% increase from the same reporting period in 2022. What's motivating this exponential increase in book banning, and what does it mean for the art of storytelling and the free exchange of ideas? More importantly, are we heading down a path that leads to even greater censorship of movement, thoughts, and beliefs? Because this issue is so important, tonight, on a special edition of Chicago Newsroom 2.0, we'll take another look under the cover of these increasing efforts of censorship, with leaders fighting vigilantly to ensure that free people may continue to read and think freely. And I'm so particularly excited because not only are we talking about this critically important topic, but tonight we have a live studio audience with us. But first, I'll talk with the leader who spearheaded legislation to prevent book banning here in Illinois, Senator Mike Simmons.
I'm Hugo Valta, host of the program 3 Questions With. The growth of the Latino economy is because more Latinos are becoming entrepreneurs. The Latino community must take ownership of its future to ensure this growth continues.
Businesses start growing and creating jobs and employment so we can develop our own supply chain. If we don't do that, we're going to keep being the consumers and the workers.
Join us on Wednesdays at 7:30 in the evening via Channel 19, streaming on cantv.org and the Can TV Plus app.
Following restrictive book bannings in Florida and around the nation, my first guest advanced legislation out of the Illinois Senate to prevent books from being banned here in Illinois. In a Chicago Sun-Times opinion piece, he talked about why he wrote the bill, stating, "Books open doors and change the course of my life. Every person, but especially every child, has the right to free and robust access to books, just as I did. The attacks on books today are unlike anything I've seen in my lifetime. Book banning now is not about the book. It is intentional and willful discrimination, erasing people and their identities from our society. 6 states have proposed legislation to ban books. Florida specifically has enacted a notorious Don't Say Gay bill, which prohibits classroom discussion about sexual orientation or gender identity in certain grade levels. Senator Mike Simmons, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Andrea. It's good to be here.
It's so nice to see you. Let's just take a minute to talk a little bit about how you became Senator Mike Simmons. What drove you to public service and to seek public office?
You know, it really starts with the household I grew up in. I grew up in a multi-generational household with my mother, my grandmother, 2 uncles, and my younger sister. And there was a community just within our household. And the way that my mom raised me and my younger sister as a single parent, the way that my grandmother helped my mother, the way that our neighbors helped to look after me and how we helped our neighbors, is something that I felt is needed right now in our political climate. Just more people that have a sense of community and have a sense of other people's struggles and are willing to join hands with them and fight for their communities. And so that is more than anything else what propelled me to run for the state Senate.
Well, and that's really special, and that really concept of community and stepping up and helping each other. In so many places, we are losing that. Mm-hmm. But also really important to you is this concept of service and being of service to others. And you, when you got to the Senate, wasted no time in being of service. You were elected, and your first term was in 2021,
yes.
And I'm right.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2021, during your first term, you pushed the submitted the Jet Hawkins law, mm-hmm. which banned hairstyle discrimination. Let's talk a little bit about that law and why it was so important for you to do, and to do it in your first term as a senator.
So, my first 2 months as state senator, I could tell you I was sitting in my office late one night and I was reading a Block Club Chicago article, and I saw a story about a 4-year-old black child on the west side of Chicago named Jet Hawkins, who his mother had braided his hair, and he was excited to go to school. And the story was about how the young boy was suspended because of his hair. And that infuriated me. I remember at the time, I'm not a demonstrative person necessarily, but I took the paper and threw it across my office, and I said, "That's it. I'm a state senator. I have the ability to do something about this. I'm tired of reading about black athletes being barred from playing sports because of hair that looks like mine. Hair that is reflective of African ancestry and is something that is God-given and is very much a part of who we are." And so I called my staff that night and I said, "We got to get a bill on this. It's time to turn the page on this dark and ugly history. I'm tired of seeing black youth being criminalized for who they are." And it was a fight. That bill, we got it passed my first year, but I don't want to undertell how much fighting it took to get it passed, how much maneuvering it took, and how much persuading it took, and how much it took to get that bill signed into law by Governor Pritzker, and now is the law of the land.
Wow, really powerful and so important because really the hair is about expression and free expression. And that's really the whole free expression of ideas really relates directly to book banning. So talk about the bill you submitted and got passed on book banning.
Yeah. So, there's a through line here, right? People targeting black hair. Roe v. Wade is taken down by the Supreme Court last year, targeting bodily autonomy, trying to take possession of people's bodies and the rights, right, and their ability to make decisions about their own bodies. Book banning is a similar issue because we're seeing now that people are running, for example, for school boards and school districts on the sole agenda to ban books from being displayed that talk about LGBTQ people. I'm the first openly gay person, by the way, first openly LGBTQ person elected to the Illinois Senate ever. I also am a person who is the first black person to be elected to serve from the state Senate for my district on the far north side of Chicago. My dad was from Ethiopia, so that makes me the first Ethiopian American to serve in either chamber of the General Assembly. So there's a lot of intersectionality there. And if you look at the data around these book bans, over 2,000, according to PEN America, that were done last year around the country, the top categories, more than 50%, more than one of the two book bans is targeting people like myself, right? So that the next generation can't pick up a book and read about the first openly LGBTQ black state senator from the north side of Chicago. And so that was a powerful motivator for me to draft that legislation, SB 689.
Right. And so how did did you have the same kind of fight as you had with the Jet Hawkins bill?
Yeah. So, with SB 689, it was definitely hard to get that bill passed out of the Senate. I remember it took several weeks for it to get a hearing, and I had to really, really push hard to convince my colleagues and the staff that this is an important issue, not just for me and my own community, but for so many communities, right? When we're talking about book bannings that target people of color, we're talking about black communities, we're talking about communities that are AAPI, we're talking about communities that are Latinx. And that's so much of the district I represent alone, let alone the rest of the state of Illinois. So I got a lot of pushback on that because we were trying to be intentional about protecting those communities. I wrote my legislation so that we included protections for books that deal with reproductive rights, sexual health, memoirs and autobiographies, books about religion and people's faith backgrounds, right? The things that people want to eliminate. And that makes this some of the most important legislation that we actually can get moving through the General Assembly right now. So we were able to get that bill passed out of the state Senate on April 27th. And it was a bright day. I was so happy the day we passed that bill. I did a cartwheel when we got it passed because it took a lot of hard work. And now we're trying to get that bill out of the Senate, out of the House.
Right.
We've run into some similar issues on the House side, but we're continuing that advocacy and really continuing to push and make sure that people understand if you don't support this bill, you are supporting a scenario where you are keeping a foot on the neck of people like myself and communities that I come from, but you are also tacitly supporting what is effectively a cultural obliteration of so many people whose stories have never been told and deserve to be told.
Well, and I think equally important, and I think we're going to talk about this a little bit more in the next segment, you're also in supporting the censorship of ideas and thoughts and suggesting that because people think differently or see differently or have different experiences, that's something to be afraid of as opposed to celebrate it. And if you don't want to read the book, don't read it. It's pretty simple.
Right.
Just don't have, it's kind of, I'm always like, well, just don't let your kid read it.
That's
That's
right.
what you want. Anyway, I am so sorry to say that, as usual, when I'm fascinated and have such an incredible guest, I run out of time. And so we are out of time. Thank you for
course.
everything that you're doing, for your bravery and courage to stand up in already such a short tenure in the Senate. It's really terrific, and you're exactly the kind of public servant we need.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us.
Absolutely.
We'll be right back. Thank you.
I'm Jamira Alexander, inviting you to join me for the season finale of Public Narrative: A Word. Black joy, from personal experience, I can say there's just nothing like it. And for upcoming guests, Sandria Washington and Dr. Samantha Coleman, it's something that became a journey upon learning that they were adopted. Catch the conversation Thursday, December 7th at 7 p.m. on CanTV, Cable Channel 19, and streaming on cantv.org and the CanTV Plus app.
According to the literary advocacy organization PEN America, books are under profound attack in the United States. They are disappearing from library shelves, being challenged in droves, being decreed off limits by school boards, legislatures, and prison authorities. And it is the books that have long fought for a place on the shelf that are being targeted. Books by authors of color, by LGBTQ plus authors, by women, books about racism, sexuality, gender, and history. What's propelling this increasing appetite for censorship? And what can be done to stop or at least resist it? Joining me at the roundtable tonight are some incredible leaders who have strong opinions about the topic of book banning. Chris Brown, Commissioner of the Chicago Public Library. Deborah Caldwell, Director of the Office of Intellectual Freedom with the American Library Association, and DePaul University professor and Kennedy King College professor, Ciara Miller. Welcome. Let's get to it. So let's just make sure we level set a little, because I always assume people know what we're talking about, particularly on a topic like this, but I always often find out that not. When we use the phrase book banning, and Deborah, I'm going to start with you. What does that mean? When somebody says book banning to you, or you're fighting against book banning, what are we talking about?
Well, we use very precise definitions at the American Library Association. We define a ban as when official action is taken to restrict or remove a book from access to the reader, to the community as a whole. We also talk about challenges. That's a demand to censor a book that arises from an individual or group. And what we're seeing is a real rise, unprecedented rise in the number of demands to remove books, many of them successful in the last 2 years.
So, and how does that work when someone wants to either ban a book or remove a book? Who are the authorities that govern that?
Well, generally, it's either the library board or the school board that makes those decisions, the governing body. But what usually happens is an individual will raise a complaint about a book. A group will raise a complaint about a group. And that's actually okay. You know, everybody has a right to petition the government, as they say. But what happens after that is very important. There should be a process to examine the book to make sure it was acquired according to policy, that it serves the information needs of someone in the community. If it does all those things, it should remain on the shelf. And that's called the reconsideration process. But what we're seeing now is efforts to circumvent the reconsideration process, to redefine what makes a book appropriate for the reader, particularly for young people, and to define whole topics out of the realm of possibility. As you said, books dealing with race, racism, LGBTQIA plus issues are all being defined as illegal or inappropriate for readers to have access to.
Chris, as the Commissioner of Chicago Public Library, are there books that you would consider possibly taking off their shelves or limiting access to? And if so, what would that fall under?
I think we trust our librarians. We've hired people that are skilled in what they do. Our process of purchasing materials, they're looking at reviews, they're looking at what our community demands. And so I think as a practice, we definitely don't look to remove material based on political pressure or content of the book. And also, the Chicago Public Library has a long history of being a staunch advocate for the diversity of our collection. We're in our 150th anniversary, and we have notable librarians like Charlotte Mahill Rollins, who really spent her career making sure we had a very diverse representative collection for Chicago. So not something we practice, and something that we actually have advocated against. We've declared all of our 81 locations as book sanctuaries, and so it's something that's near and dear to our work.
Do you get a lot of challenges to books at CPL?
I think what's so kind of threatening about these book challenges is they're not only even about books. So when we do programming that's about audiences that are LGBTQ+, if we're doing fashion programming, or if we're having drag queen story time, we'll get social media challenges where people will threaten to come out to the event or to protest if we don't cancel them. And so it's an issue that's not only affecting books, but also just identity and who people are, their history and their core selves.
Right. Wow. So Ciara, what's initiating? Where are these bans? Where are these ideas or these desire to censor ideas or disagreement? Why is it coming through with these bans? What's the motive behind this? Are you looking at this? Are you studying this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really great question. There could be a number of answers to that, but I do think that the book bans really surged around the time of the George Floyd riots. And I think that the nation was awakened to racial injustices. Of course, we've had a number of different times in our history in which we've had some major event that made us aware, like, oh, this is a very unjust country. But that's one of our more recent issues with the Black Lives Matter murals being painted on the streets of DC, for example, and then literally people busting windows and burning down buildings. So the nation was awakened, and I think that it was a way to, like, banning books was a way to say, hey, let's try to calm this down. Let's try to make sure that people don't get so angry that they take these actions and create total anarchy. And I just think that it's not the most progressive way to deal with the systemic injustices that do exist. Taking away the books doesn't take away the damage that redlining has done. It doesn't take away the fact that so many people have to be bused to different neighborhoods just to get a quality education. It doesn't take away the fact that a lot of students won't learn about their identity until they go to college, if they could even afford that. So yes, I think that certain political issues that have made it to the mainstream news are probably a bit of a catalyst for these book bans.
Yes. Deborah, what do you say though to parents who are, talking to their school board and saying, my kids aren't ready for those ideas, or I think those kind of ideas, I want to teach them in my home. I don't want the school teaching them. What is the answer of the Library Association to them?
Actually, we don't quarrel with that. We do believe a parent has a right to guide their child's reading, their education, but that doesn't extend to demanding that everyone else's reading and education conform to those values and beliefs. We know that we're living in an increasingly diverse society. People are finding their voices and places on the social stage, and they deserve to find books on the shelf, find programs at the library that reflect their experiences and not just one narrow experience that someone wants to elevate for themselves and their family. So we support the idea of opt-out. Sure, you can take your kid out of that one assignment. You can ask that your kid not be loaned that one book that you don't approve of, but you can't tell anybody else what they can read or what they can do. And that's all founded on the very fundamental First Amendment principle that we have a right to receive information, to make our own choices about our reading. And that's a fundamental liberty that we're seeing attacked right now with these efforts to remove books from libraries and take books out of classrooms.
Right, I guess that really gets to, it is kind of core to the First Amendment. So, Chris, when I know you talk on this topic a lot, when it comes up, what is the answer to people when you say, hello, you live in America, diverse, just, you don't have to read it. Why do you want to prevent other people from seeing these ideas?
And we were talking about this backstage a little bit too, just I think concern we have right now for what this is going to do to our authors and their diverse voices. And you mentioned the George Floyd tragedy. I think this is an interesting issue that's been at play for a long time. The day that the Chauvin verdict was announced, they announced the publication of Richard Wright's unpublished novel, The Man Who Lived Underground. Right. And I think that's a fascinating story as well. Why was that book not published during his lifetime? Why was it published posthumously? And I think that's a real worry. What's going to happen to our authors? How are they going to start to censor themselves? And I think as an author and poet, that's probably something that is close to your work.
Yeah, I mean, that was a really great conversation that you brought up. I didn't think about it before, but I think that, writers want to be published. They want people to read their work. And if you know that you can't reach a lot of people, especially K through 12, that's a huge audience. If you can't reach that audience, you might start to censor yourself. I've seen numbers of writers and poets really consider what to write about that's going to basically be able to be published in like the larger journals. And that's a censorship that I don't think that we can afford to really have. At the same time, I will say this, institutions have an intention, and that is to basically uphold its ideologies. And I think patriotism, loyalty, that's a part of it, right? And so if we're actually writing about things that are anti-institutional, it's often going to be those publications that are more underground that's going to be the best platform for it. Not that I agree with it, but I understand the confliction.
Sure, understood. But, I think it is also, really going back to, Deborah, what you said about the First Amendment and about America, it's interesting to me. There's so many things about this when I think about people who are trying to ban books. First, I'm always like, well, like I said earlier, just don't read it. Just don't let your kid read it. It's kind of simple. You don't like that idea? You don't have to listen to it. You don't like that program? Don't go, all right? It's pretty simple, but I don't understand that. But the other thing is there's the other side of the coin. I was reading something the other day. There's a documentary out about the Chauvin murder, since we're talking about George Floyd. That's all about how he was railroaded and the FBI story stuff. Some stuff that I don't really agree with, right? So if we're going to censor stuff, why don't we censor? I mean, that whole idea that you're going to censor a set of ideas, like, well, we could censor some ideas. It goes both ways, and it shocks me that people don't see that, right? That when you're censoring ideas that you don't agree with, other people can do that too. It just kind of amazes me. I don't know. Do you have thoughts about that?
It's a commitment we all have to make is to support the idea that freedom of speech means freedom of speech. Freedom of thought means freedom of thought, and if we're going to preserve that, we have to uphold it for everyone, even for the phrase is even for the thought that we hate. The best remedy, I think, is to get involved, to speak out ourselves, to elevate our own voices. I often advise libraries, you have values. You can elevate your values even as you recognize the fact that you have to have books and even programs that don't always reflect the views of yourself or your staff in the library, because we support that fundamental freedom to think for ourselves, make up our own minds, have a wide variety of ideas so that everyone can make their own choice about what to read. That's the essence of intellectual freedom. It's the essence of the First Amendment. And we're one of the few countries in the world that has those freedoms. And if we lose those, I can't calculate what we're going to lose.
Right. Another core irony, right? That we are in a country where we have free ideas, and it is not only core to First Amendment, it's core to democracy, right? One of the core principles of democracy is an informed electorate. Well, you can't be informed if half of the ideas have been banned from the library. But again, many of the people who are supporting book banning and taking books off the shelves are people who also are doing so, promote patriotism, and it seems to me to be so completely inconsistent. I don't know, do you see that at all in the work that you're doing, Chris, in really kind of this dichotomy between, the key to democracy, but we can't have these ideas out there?
Well, I think being in libraries, our core values and this gets to even the American Library Association Bill of Rights. It's written in that our work is to actually advocate against censorship. That's part of being a library, is to actively work against censorship. And not only for us to work against censorship, but part of that ALA Bill of Rights also states to find partners, because to your point, it is a democratic issue. It is a First Amendment issue. It's not just a library issue. So being on your program, being with professors and other writers is a big part of that work to have the freedom to read and think and express ourselves.
But I would tell you too that one of my fears and one of the motivations for the book banning is an authoritarian impulse to actually shut down these conversations, to shut down access to alternative ideas, alternative voices, to even attack the very idea of having a public institution like a library with its wealth of resources that allow people to discover new ideas and make up their own minds. They don't want that. They would love to see libraries become centers of indoctrination rather than education.
Right. Wow. So powerful and important. Just one last quick question. If people are hearing what you're hearing and they're saying, you know what, I want to make sure that I support free speech and the access for free people to read freely, is there something they can do? Is there a campaign they can support?
Absolutely. There is an initiative called Unite Against Book Bans at uniteagainstbookbans.org. And it's an initiative that ALA is behind that is intended to empower individuals in the community to support their freedom to read, to be able to go to their local school board, their local library board, and advocate for the freedom to read what they want, to protect against censorship, to make sure that they're holding their elected officials and their board members accountable and making sure that they adhere to the First Amendment and the freedom to read, that they're supporting and funding their library and their library professionals and allowing them to serve the community as best they know how.
Well, terrific. Thank you so much. We are out of time again on this really important topic. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the work. Thank you for your passionate protection of the right to access to books and to ideas and to thought. I really appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you. We'll be right back.
I'm Anna Valencia.
And I'm Connie Lindsay. And we're your hosts for Joy in the Breakthrough,
A podcast where we'll be talking to a wide range of leaders from different generations and backgrounds who have found power in being broken open.
Tune in every Monday at 7 o'clock p.m. on CAN TV Channel 19, streaming on cantv.org, and now available on the new CAN TV Plus app. Experience the power of community television.
If there is a bedrock principle underlying the First Amendment, it is that the government may not prohibit the expression of an idea simply because society finds the idea itself offensive or disagreeable. Restriction of free thought and free speech is the most dangerous of all subversions and undercuts the bedrock of our democracy, an informed people. It is the one un-American act that could most easily defeat us. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. There can be no neutrality here. Each of us has an obligation to protect the right of free people to read freely. Each of us must make an intentional choice about which side of history we choose to stand. This time, there can be no standing on the sidelines. Until next time, be well and well informed.